After an entire year of being told AI was going to wipe out jobs, the collapse hasn't happened. Not yet. Unemployment hasn't spiked. Most people have their roles. The economy looks, well, pretty much the same as last year. And that creates a strange tension. You heard the warnings, you felt the fear, but now you're sitting here wondering, did the hype come and go? Was this another cycle of exaggerated tech panic? Maybe it's just another tool, like email once was, like social media once was. Useful, disruptive, but certainly not going to replace me altogether. And that's exactly where most people are right now, in a waiting game. But history has a way of repeating itself. Before the 2008 financial crisis, the unemployment numbers didn't collapse first. The early crash showed up in places most people weren't looking. So the real question isn't whether AI has replaced jobs yet. It's whether we're watching the wrong indicators. Is this stability real, or is it actually just the calm before the storm? If there's anyone who can help us make sense of the moment, it's Sinéad Bovell, one of the leading futurists working at the intersection of technology and society. She's spoken at the United Nations over 10 times, and she's in the rooms with people building these systems. She hosts a global series with Microsoft on AI and the future of work, and she has a track record of seeing inflection points before the rest of the world feels them. If we're misreading this moment, she's the person who can show us where the cracks actually are. And that matters because modern life has changed in ways that make living well harder than it should be. And the coming wave of AI isn't just another tool. It may reorganize how value is created and who gets to create it. Most of us are already operating in a quiet state of survival, trying to keep up with systems we didn't design, feeling behind before we even made a choice. And that's why Mighty Pursuit exists, to give you a North Star, integrating mind, body, and spirit into one clear roadmap for living well. The podcast is where we slow down and examine one part of that roadmap at a time. And today we zoom in on purpose, how AI may reshape our work, our careers, and what it means to stay ahead of the curve. This conversation takes you behind the scenes and lays out practical insights you'll need to navigate this year and the age to come. So let's begin. So I want you to imagine someone, let's call her Sarah. She spent all of 2025 hearing that AI was going to wipe out jobs, the white-collar work would collapse, the entire industries would disappear. And so now it's 2026. She still has her job. None of her friends have been replaced, at least not yet. And so her life mostly looks the same. And she's starting to wonder if it was all overhyped. What would you say to her?
What would I say to Sarah? I would say that we are definitely overestimating the impact that we'll see with AI and jobs and change in the short run. So I think over the long term, a lot of the jobs that Sarah is hearing about in 2025 that will eventually go away or be radically transformed and become unrecognizable, that will be true over the 18-month or 24-month convenient timeline that also happens to coincide with a lot of funding cycles and raising cycles? Probably not. We're starting to see some changes in the data with respect to labor and skill composition within workflows. But this idea, and I know I've heard the stats too, 50% of white-collar jobs could be obsolete by, maybe now it's been pushed to 2027, 2028.
Yeah.
That might not be the case over the short term. But over the long term, depending on what Sarah does, I would say that she could bet that her job will look really different or maybe not exist at all. That workflow might not make sense.
When you say short term and long term, how do you define those?
That's a great question. And I know the pendulum keeps swinging and moving. I would say short term for me is 3 years, which is interesting because that tends to be companies' longer-term strategic plans, which is just tragic. If you're thinking 3 years into the future and that's where it ends, you're probably going to get disrupted. And longer term, I would say looking 7 to 10 years. And so there, the forecasts seem to be, and it's funny, the further out you go into the future, the less you can predict or see. But when it comes to these general purpose technologies that behave in a certain way, your estimates of change tend to be a little bit more, not accurate, but closer to the forecast.
When you think about technology change throughout history, I mean, 7 to 10 years is still pretty short term. I mean, if you think about the fact that, I mean, however many thousands of years of history it took to get to the internet in like the 1990s, and then even from then to social media to now, I mean, 7 to 10 years is like not that long.
Well, I guess
time.
we could count. I mean, AI has been around for a while, but if we could count from the end of 2022, where ChatGPT really came on the scene, and then if we're looking 10 years from now, so we're looking around 13 years in this latest era of Transformers architecture lifespan, what type of change could we see? And it's not actually that unforeseeable. I mean, if you look at about 80 years, 60% of the occupations that exist today didn't exist 80 years ago. And if we're to go back to the Industrial Revolution, moving from agriculture to mechanized work and in the rise of factory labor, you're looking at about 70% of people doing something radically different over 100 years. So the question that's in front of us is, what would that look like to have 70% of the population do something different, but not on an industrial scale or an industrial timeline, but closer to that 10 to 15 to 20 years? And that's where you could see it as alarm bells, or maybe that's reassuring for a lot of people, but that's where the time scale tends to start making a little bit more sense.
So when you hear figures like Elon Musk and Sam Altman say that like AI is going to replace most jobs, do you feel like people should believe those sorts of statements?
I would say it's what is the part two to that statement? So a lot of the different tech leaders will say, and there's different economists depending on where you fall, that sure, maybe a lot of the jobs that they're currently building AI systems for could maybe be done by AI systems. And this would be specifically knowledge work. So things that are happening on a computer, maybe financial analysts or tax returns or paralegals, that type of role or roles that involve those types of tasks. So could those be wiped out? Potentially. That's at least what they're optimizing and building AI specifically to do. But that's where their forecasts tend to end. It's over, and that is the end. All the best to everybody else. I see a part two to that, and depending on which economists you subscribe to, they would either agree or disagree, that when an input becomes more abundant, so in this case, it's going to be, we'll say intelligence, and we'll definitely use it in air quotes, the economy will reconfigure around that new resource becoming abundant. And it could reconfigure in really strange ways, the same way when communication and distribution became free and abundant, aka the internet. People started to make money over pretending they were in a vehicle and they're not, and they're filming a video about something, and there's an entire new economy around that. So when intelligence becomes much cheaper, how does the economy reconfigure? And then what do we do on the other side of that? We will do something. We'll probably work less. We'll probably work in very unrecognizable ways, even though what we're doing right now, what are we doing, right? That's entirely unrecognizable. So it will still be like that. It will just be something different and something that doesn't necessarily resemble the knowledge economy. Those tasks will probably go to AI. But there's a lot of disagreement. There will be AI leaders that would push back on that and say, nope, it's done. And then the robots are here. I think there will be a part two.
What do you mean that what we're doing is unrecognizable?
I mean, how would you describe the work that you and I do? Or even the work of a brand manager to somebody 150 years ago?
That's a good point, yeah.
What would you say that actually is? Somebody is helping to describe, well, what's a brand? Well, it's, okay, so why is there somebody managing that? All of these jobs that we invented and towards more service and towards more knowledge work. So we moved from a world where work was, or labor was defined by muscle. Now we're in a world where labor is defined in some ways by the cognitive capabilities you have. And we're moving to a world where work may be defined by, and that's variable X.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating, really, if you, as a thought experiment, if you go through that and think about if you explain to somebody in 1850, like, oh, we record, what do you mean record? Like, so
we
it's
send
just like,
emails.
Yeah.
We build Microsoft Excel sheets and we try to predict how much money people in a different country are going to have. Well, why would you do that? Like all of these things that we've created don't necessarily make sense out of context. And that's why whatever comes next won't really make sense to us right now, because the systems that encompass it have truly not been invented.
Now, in terms of the statements from these tech figures, So one of our recent guests was Bill Gurley, and he's like a legendary investor in Silicon Valley. Uber was the big thing that he got in early on. And so we were talking with him about like AI fear. And it's interesting because he's like an insider with I think Benchmark Capital, and he was just talking about how these people hype their own products and services to raise more money. And so basically, in some ways, the thing that is like sparking fear ends up raising a ton of money because it's so hyped, like we're going to build this thing, and then that leads. So do you feel like that reality is also accurate part of the picture?
Sure. Yeah. There's definitely marketing and fundraising incentives that are driving some of the narratives that we hear, and that isn't anything new. So yes, I think some of the narratives definitely come from we have a funding round coming up. The system we are particularly building can build and do all jobs in the knowledge economy. That's very profitable, and if an AI system can do that, that company is going to make a lot of money. So that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think it's entirely wrong, again, that AI will be able to do a significant portion of the jobs some of the jobs that we see today. And even though I think there's going to be there will be an economy, how many people are in it, and do the jobs of the future replace, or are they actually geographically found in regions where jobs were lost? Those are all questions that we don't necessarily know. The same way globalization changed the composition of work and who we could say, more winners or more losers, economically speaking. We might see strange patterns like that. But yes, again, the narrative of it's going to be able to do everything is a very profitable one. So if you follow those incentives, sure, you're going to make a little bit more money versus saying our AI can do a few tasks sometimes for a couple people, probably not going to raise much.
Yeah, it's more nuanced. Now, if you look at the latest jobs reports in the U.S., this was I think January, but I don't know what it was at in February, but employment's still growing and unemployment is hovering around levels that we've kind of seen for years. In parts of Europe, there's some softening, but nothing resembling a collapse. So on the surface, the labor market looks steady right now, if you were to just like read the news headlines. So is that a misreading of the data, or do you think we're just asking the wrong question entirely?
No, that is what the data does show, that even some of the productivity numbers are quite misleading as well, too. You'll hear, productivity's through the roof, it's incredible, or we're not seeing anything. So I think some of that data is right. When you drill down, though, into hiring, so we're seeing some fewer job postings in certain areas. We're seeing the composition of skills within the jobs that companies are actually hiring for change. So maybe now you were hiring for a financial analyst. This person has to be able to do amazing with spreadsheets. And now if you're to actually drill down into how that post has changed or that job position has changed, you have to be able to direct and observe or apply judgment to different financial patterns. So something that's much more akin to directing or guiding AI systems over just building and crunching the numbers. So the composition of work has changed. And then that has a downstream impact because that might not be the same person. So the person who was best for the job posting in 2024 may no longer be a fit in 2026. So those are interesting signals and kind of the level of the data that I would be going into to show, okay, who companies are hiring for is starting to change. But this idea that it's, everybody's going to be wiped out in a year, that doesn't really, I'm not seeing that data either. But I also, it's one thing for the data to be overstated or for the data to, say one set of numbers and AI companies to say something else. But policy still has an important role to play in between. And if AI companies are telling us what they're trying to build, even though it doesn't show up in the numbers yet, I think policymakers would still be wise to have a plan in the event that it goes really well or not so well. And that's the gap that I'm really paying attention to. That you can't, just because you don't see it in the numbers, it doesn't mean that you should sit back and enjoy the ride, because that ride might be really bumpy. And that's where my concerns lie. I wouldn't consider myself an optimist or pessimist. I'm neither of those things. And just because I think there's going to be an economy on the other side that involves people, it doesn't mean that that transition is smooth. And it doesn't mean that it brings everyone if you don't intentionally design a system to do that. And that's where it's still been crickets from the policy crowd. I think this year, And over the next couple of years, we'll start to see the rise of political campaigns totally centered around AI and not sovereign AI, national security, not that type of narrative, but what AI hopefully means for the person and the economy. I think we're going to start to see it and to hear about it.
Now, when you think about all these scenarios and the government preparing for them, do you see the moment that we're living in, like right now in 2026, as the calm before the storm? Is that how you would paint it, or you paint it differently than that?
As the calm before the storm? Sure. Yeah, because if you are to zoom out into kind of a wider historical lens and measure something over the course of a century or over the course of a few decades, change is coming. And it's not just AI that is headed towards us. There's then quantum behind it, and then there's synthetic biology, and there's space, and AI is multiplying the speed of discovery and the speed of progress in all of those fields. So sure, yes, I would say that we could see this as the calm before, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a storm, but the calm before a period where we come out on the other side, whether that's in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and life starts to become very unrecognizable. But again, we've been living unrecognizable lives. It's just likely going to compress.
So in terms of like signals of that, of like that there are incremental things that are changed. I mean, we talked offline about like an example, the 2008 financial collapse. Like in 2008 in the fall, I think in September, it was very dramatic what happened, and everybody was like, what the hell is happening right now? But in 2005, 2006, you had the subprime mortgages and so many like little types of like indicators. So in a technological shift like AI, what would be like, where would those early indicators, or what do they look like right now that you're seeing changes happening?
You can definitely always follow the money and the capital flows. So I'd say one thing that's interesting, if you track investment patterns of maybe an investment bank or a big asset fund or a big asset management, you may see money now flowing into business models that are much more resilient towards AI and away from companies or sectors where the model is more likely to be disrupted. So that's not you wouldn't necessarily see a change in overall spend, but the allocation of capital and where it's moving is towards more AI resilient incumbents. So if the company already exists, or towards more AI native operating system companies. So different types of startups. So that's something that's interesting, but wouldn't necessarily, the average person wouldn't pay attention to that. And there's really no reason to. If you look at some of the multilateral institutions, so thinking like IMF, World Bank, or central banks, you can see them start to now pay attention to the impact AI will have over longer term periods. So they're not coming out and kind of waving the drum of everybody, wake up and smell the coffee to this AI train. But when you look at how they're forecasting and when you look at the types of speeches that they're making, they are planning for this next era, and AI is a general purpose technology. I'd say looking at complementary assets. So people may be getting spooked about investing in AI directly, but we're seeing a lot of investment move towards AI complements. So different sources of energy, systems that make water a lot more resilient. Can we use the water and clean it and filter it, because AI systems are going to need that. So following these investment patterns that maybe if you're risk adverse, you're doing the thing alongside AI, but you're still indirectly betting that AI is going to be a core part. And then there's also things like the hardware. So whether it's phone manufacturers, whether it's vehicle manufacturers, redesigning devices to be able to house AI on the actual platform. So on your phone, in your car. So they're redesigning, and their kind of manufacturing patterns, which is investment in physical hardware, are accounting for this AI future. It doesn't make sense for them to be writing a New York Times op-ed about it, but they're accounting for it. So when you look at the signals and the data, they're not necessarily the ones that are trending on X, but different big movements are happening in the data flows that we're not necessarily paying attention to.
There's this scene, I think it was in like The Big Short, of when they walked into a bank and basically they started learning that they were giving mortgages for like $800,000 houses to people that were like basically putting no money down, that like weren't making that much money. And it was just kind of this like shocking moment of like how is this happening right now? And I think I've had moments like that of like the very real time day to day when you're actually using AI. And this is another thing we talked a little bit offline about, the fact of like something took 6 or 7 hours to do. And then you charge somebody, let's just say you're a freelancer, you charge them based on your time and you make X amount of money. Now, the time that it actually takes to perform that task is now exponentially smaller, especially in some domains. So you could take 30 minutes. So like the value of what you're creating, when you think about that and then you extrapolate it out to every field and every sort of like business negotiation, it becomes pretty like mind blowing, because the value that you're selling is like, oh, I was giving 6 hours of my time at $100 an hour and I'm making $600, but now they know that I can do this in 30 minutes. And so am I making $50 now? Would they just go get somebody else to do it for $50 instead of paying me $600? What is my unique value? And so those are some of the signs that I was thinking about recently. I'm like,
definitely.
Oh my God.
We're in this strange in between times. And even if you were to go back to that hypothetical example you gave of Sarah at the beginning. So yeah, I'm still working, and my employers mentioned AI and we're supposed to use it, but we're all still employed and so are all of my friends. But then, Sarah, how much are you using AI to maybe draft an email? Or if you work in software, the realities of AI are showing up a lot quicker for you. And, depending on which country you're in, AI is already part of a lot of people's daily workflows, even if it's making a recipe, even if it's, how do I rephrase that email? That's a pretty significant and fast integration compared to past technologies. And then your point about, sure, if you are in a service-based, knowledge-based pricing model where you're paying me for my time, whether that's legal services or my financial valuations, now I know that that's going to be 40 minutes, not 40 days. So there will be a repricing of these services to account for the new floor being a significant portion of the task is completed by AI, but the judgment to direct that AI system and to sign off on it. I mean, if you were doing something really legally risky, and I don't mean actually illegal, but you were doing, transactions, buying a bunch of companies, things that you would want to make sure you had a lawyer's view and sign off. All of this makes sense. I'm going in a few different countries. You would expect that lawyer to work faster, but would you be okay with just ChatGPT signing off on it? Maybe not. So that lawyer can now do what would have taken a lot more hours in a few hours, but you're still probably going to pay for that person's judgment. But we don't need as many people doing that. But what is the AI system and workflow and series of agents that legal firm has now built to do that type of work? And who's building those AI systems? I bet it's not the partners. That's a new cohort of people directing agents that are going to come up. So we're going to probably see some repricing. And that's why it's also, depending on whichever work, if you do work on a computer, you do have to expect that right now your manager isn't valuing the fact that you're using AI yet, but soon that's going to become the expectation. And that's where we might see some repricing of labor as a result. And that's the same thing. If somebody was working on spreadsheets versus spreadsheets on a computer, we would expect them to be faster. That expectation is coming with AI when it becomes general purpose, and it's just a thing we do work on.
So if you were to think about the layers of this, I want to say, maybe getting your opinion if this is accurate or not. So 2024, 2025, like people just starting to discover this technology, and then let's just say they start using it well, and they're like, oh, wow, I could like save so much time, still getting paid the same amount of money from their company. So then whatever their workload was, now they just like shaved like 20, 25 hours a week off of it, and they're like coasting. Are you saying that now we're in this kind of in-between period, but that's not the expectation now? Is it going to be like 3 times or 4 times as much as what you were doing before? And so any gains that you would be making are basically now going to be offset because that's the new standard?
Sure. So yeah, arbitrage opportunities don't exist in perpetuity, right? So yes, the fact that you may have saved 25 hours off your week, and I actually have friends that are like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in marketing and now I have half my Fridays off. And it's great. It's not that, so that mindset that we have to do triple the work because AI is now expected of us. It's not necessarily that. In the short term, yes, maybe, because you're expected to do the old tasks and now you have AI so you can do them faster. But the real change that comes in with these technologies is that we do different things. So the work you're doing may not even make sense in the next couple of years. So the tasks that you do within your marketing role, it's not just now you have to do 100 times them because now you have AI, so you better be faster. You might do something entirely different. So both of those things, and that's what's hard to see about the future. But yes, ride the wave now. If you have an arbitrage opportunity, either take it if you need that extra time, or use it to start really building some of these AI skills.
Yeah, and I want to get to those changes and the skills that are needed. One other thing that I wanted to ask about is in terms of signs, like, so the big thing in the news the past 2 weeks was Block. Jack Dorsey, who was one of the co-founders of Twitter, runs Block, which is the Square technology. They laid off 40% of their workforce and then cited AI. Meta is now apparently going to lay off 20% of their workforce. Do you look at those as additional signs of something that we're going to be seeing more and more and more common in the news in the coming year or two?
Yeah, and it's funny because I did strategically leave that one out of the data that I'm consistently tracking.
Yeah.
Yes. So some of these announcements are definitely related to AI, where we're seeing 15,000 layoffs, or we can freeze hiring 10% of our workforce. Some is definitely AI related, but it's not for that one-to-one replacement where we don't need to hire because AI can do your job. Realistically, AI cannot do your full workflow unless you did something very specific and the same thing all day, every day. But AI could be related because companies are reallocating capital away from labor towards AI and AI infrastructure.
Yeah.
So they're not replacing you with AI, but they're assuming that either your workflow isn't going to be needed in the next evolution of their organization, or they're still better off putting that towards AI infrastructure and redesigning their company for the AI age. So I am looking at those signals, and they're important. And what we also haven't seen yet that I see in my work with companies is how they are redesigning that org chart around the workflows of the future. So, okay, we don't actually even need, not because AI can do X, Y, or Z, but we don't need this entire cohort of people, but we're going to play in a different game. So that just doesn't even make sense whether AI can do it or not. We are over here in the AI economy. So all of that's going to start to happen. Yeah, so we might hear more announcements, and we should expect that. When you hear AI, assign it loosely to those narratives. And some of it actually was just over hiring during the pandemic, but AI is a lot sexier of a story. So some of that is that bloat. We're also in a period of tremendous economic uncertainty. I think I don't need to explain why, we wake up every week and we feel like we're in a literal new economy, a new world. Companies have to price that in, that economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that shows up somewhere, and that can show up in labor. And then some of it is making a bet that AI could probably perform a workflow to a good enough job that a company could take the risk of firing a few people and replacing them with AI, even if it makes a few mistakes. So it's all of that. So it's a bit more complicated and nuanced than AI is taking your job.
In a video you released a couple months ago, one of your biggest predictions for 2026 was there would be a backlash or like movement sort of against AI that emerges throughout this year. So what specifically do you believe would be driving that, and like what would that even look like?
I think we're going to see a multitude of reasons of why people are going to push back on artificial intelligence. And we're already starting, the narrative we'll see a lot of democratic societies, or we can say traditional Western societies versus the global South. So we'll say the global North versus the global South. The narrative towards AI the sentiment is already much more negative compared to the global South. And AI is often framed through the lens of this threat. So we can do your work isn't really valuable, and a robot's going to come and be able to replace it. That's very destabilizing for people. That's very unnerving for people. Some communities are already struggling with data center impacts. So whether that's their water's been impacted, or the electricity prices, even though it kind of depends where you are, if you're impacted by that. I think the consolidation of power is really throwing people off. And that's something that's really real, that there are 7 to 10 people, depending on how you look at it, that have outsized power and are building the infrastructure the entire world already depends on, but will depend on even more. I think that's not a good look. And then you have instances of AI locking people out of their financial services or out of healthcare. So all of these different, and then artists, what's happening there? Has anybody settled any of the copyright disputes?
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen there? And then we'll start to see more and hear more about the job layoffs as a result of whether it's because AI can do the job or we need to free up some capital. So all of these are like these different trains that are going to collide at some point. And I think that's going to be sooner rather than later. And the more you also hear about some of the riskier end state scenarios with AI, some people call it the existential risks, I think that's going to panic a lot of people too. So I think that ends up in a scenario where people are like, this technology is coming for my job. It's coming for my electricity bill. I don't relate at all to the person driving this future. And they're telling me that my work is as valuable as a system in a data center in Memphis. Why do we want this? And so you can sympathize and empathize with people. And I think that's we're going to start to see some backlash to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this was
and the environment. Another one we didn't discuss.
I mean, I think it's probably about 10 months ago now. I did some like modeling through ChatGPT of these sort of scenarios, like painting across the board. And basically what it said was that it felt that like protests in the streets type of thing would be likely by like 2028, like 2029. And there would have to be, to your point, there would have to be serious measures put in place now, like by the government, or serious things to work through the potential changes that could happen, because some of like the change that is happening, even if there were like new things created or we're doing new things, like to your point, like there's a second part of the story, the social upheaval and the change, like to actually mitigate that, there would have to be a lot that's done right now. And basically, I think it was saying that work seemed to not be that's not happening right now. And so when you hear like a scenario like that, like literal protests in the streets from people, do you find that to be an exaggeration, or do you feel like that could be a reality?
I think we could absolutely see protests as a result of this technology. I would expect that. And I think we're already seeing micro things that go viral on social media, and whether you consider that a simulation of the physical world, even though we're often delusional in that environment, things going viral about the negative impacts of AI on your life. And then think about the story around AI that's being sold. There are, and again, I'm not inherently optimist, pessimist. I don't necessarily find those titles helpful, but there are a lot of good things about this technology. There are a lot of reasons to fight for versions of AI where the world would be better. We don't really hear that. We hear about solving diseases as a kind of byproduct. But the narratives that are being championed is, AI is going to save us in national security. AI can do most of the jobs. AI can do music better than the people who made the music. So let's just move this train forward. That's not a very compelling story for a lot of people. Yeah. Most people can't relate to that. And then, yes, as you had stated, it's the transition that really concerns me. What happens from now until that new economy? Who's brought to the other side of that? That's a design space. That is not some kind of prescriptive future. And we don't really hear people with ideas designing how we ensure people are safely moved to the AI first world. We don't hear enough about what that looks like and how you protect people on the way there. And so I imagine there will be AI backlash.
I wonder if people also will start to sense how AI is impacting them cognitively. And so, I mean, last summer we had a neuroscientist on talking about this. He was talking about like parts of the brain, whether metaphorically or literally becoming atrophied. And I didn't quite get what he meant by that, because he was talking about the default mode network, and he was talking about a lot of the quote unquote muscles that we use in the brain constantly and that we have used throughout this whole knowledge work area. And that we are offloading those capabilities completely to AI. And I think that there have been moments in the past few months where I've noticed that with myself, of like, Why is it so hard to think certain tasks? Why is it so hard to just like think and do this right now? Is that something that you're sensing, that like quote unquote AI could make people cognitively dumber than they were, or less intelligent than they were before, because now they're offloading all their work to AI?
Mm. Yeah, I think yeah, and some people call it cognitive atrophy. Some people call it, cognitive debt,
Yeah.
where you give AI the task, and even if it's just something as simple as writing an email, and then you do that for 3, 4, 5 months, and then you're like, "What? I don't want to write this email without artificial intelligence." The same way, I really cannot navigate without Google Maps. It's just not going to happen. For the most part, right? And it's not that I'm necessarily worse off now that I don't have a map anymore and I'm not using, where's the North Star? I'm not necessarily worse off because we replaced a lot of that navigation with different types of thinking. So there is a world where you can use AI as a scalpel or as a springboard for different type of thinking. But are we doing that? Have we designed a world where that makes sense? Not yet. And we've essentially just thrown these tools out for everybody to use. There hasn't been much instruction of how to avoid just offloading everything to the AI system. And it is being designed in such a way that the intention is for it to be your everything. So if you are using it as a springboard, you could launch forward. And that's why I wrote this article in Substack called The Cognitive Divide that I'm seeing, where there could be a cohort that really breaks away and they do use AI in a way that enhances what their output is and what they could become with it. And then those that just start to give tasks to AI because it's easier, it's more convenient, it definitely writes better than most people. And that's the offloading of the thinking. And the challenge with that is you don't just offload your judgment skills and your ability to your discernment and your ability to solve problems. You also offload your confidence. So it gets to a point where you don't feel confident making a decision without AI. And that's a scary place to be for an individual and for a society, because there's going to be moments where we have to deviate from the system. There should be many moments where an AI system has told you something and you've recognized, nope, that doesn't make sense. Or I should triple check that fact because it isn't a fact system, it's a language system. So, and are people doing that? I'm not entirely sure. And this AI isn't coming in a vacuum where we were all using maps and navigating the world with memory. It's coming off the back of shorter reading cycles, where since the 70s, we've been reading less and less and less, these shorter excerpts. And that's partly because of education and optimization for marking, partly because of different things that we can spend our time doing, like TV. Then you see the rise of social media. So 90-second clips, 60-second clips, learn about the entire world in 90 seconds or less, decoupling context from content. And then you have Google Maps. So all of these little things. So our attention span is being rewired. And then you throw in this system that greets you everywhere and says, I can solve this for you. How can I help? Can I take this off of your plate? So off the back of that, AI does pose a greater threat. It doesn't have to. We can use it as a springboard, but the default, we're also human. We are biologically wired to seek the lowest energy state. If a system's going to do it, I'm going to choose GPS and the satellite over the physical map. I would be totally toast with a physical map. So now you're giving me the system that can allegedly think better than me. It's pretty tempting.
It's a really profound insight. I think even in terms of our expectations, I think the thing about the GPS was spot on, because if you go back to, we were talking about hundreds of years ago, right? The idea of even having a car to like go somewhere was absurd, right? And so you had people navigate, like if you watch Leonardo DiCaprio's movie in like 2023 Killers of the Flower Moon, and you have these people that are like traveling in Oklahoma on the back of a horse, carrying all this stuff. They're just like navigating this road and trying to figure out the way to go. So, and then you get cars, so then you can accelerate it. But now we're at a point where like you have the internet, then you had GPS, and now like literally it's like you feel like you're doing something wrong if you get in a car and you don't turn on.
If the driver took out a map, you would say, pull over. Yeah. Please pull over. I do not trust this vehicle.
Exactly. And so that's such a huge deviation. But now it's like, yeah, we expect that. And so I wonder if we're going to get to a moment with these cognitive capabilities where like just the expectation is like, no, we offload all of that stuff. I found in my own kind of personal work, what you're saying is true with. I feel like I have to come up with what I want to do first in some ways, and then basically it'll take whatever authentic version of who you are and what work you want to do and take it from like 70 to like 100. And so it feels like in some ways an extension of you versus like outsourcing the entire experience.
The thinking that happens before you engage with AI and after you engage with AI is really important. So how much you actually think through the problem that you're asking AI, or are you just constantly giving it half-formed thoughts? Because AI isn't going to magically raise the bar in your thinking, it's going to match it. So if you're coming with these kind of half-formed ideas, just fragments of thoughts, sometimes it can be helpful. You're like, I'm thinking of something, I don't know what I'm trying to say. But by and large, if you can do most of the thinking, structuring your problem properly to the AI, and then when it responds with something, don't just blindly accept its answer. Can you interrogate it further? Do you need more data to make a strong judgment call based on the output? One of my favorite economists, Ajay Agarwal, discusses, what are we going to do in the future? We will direct AIs by applying our judgment to them. So judgment is in what you ask the AI. I mean, you have now access to a supercomputer. What do you want to ask? And if it's the same questions you were asking pre-supercomputer, well, that might be a problem. We can ask deeper questions, higher order questions that require more computational thinking, so to speak. So again, it doesn't have to be that we're doomed with these systems. We can raise the bar, but are we doing that? And do we have an ecosystem that is facilitating that? What's happening in education? Slow blanks. Are people in the workplace being incentivized to, and here's also a good example for employers. If you're telling your employees, use AI, we're an AI first company now, suddenly, randomly, are you asking people to really explain their reasoning when they come and present something? Ask somebody, call them on this week. So what is the thought process behind that? And why did you go with X over Y? Is that therefore a ChatGPT generated idea, or is it yours? So all of these different ways we can force judgment. And sorry for everybody if their boss is listening and now they're going to do that.
Now, if we were to think about the wide range of scenarios of the ways that this could go in the next 2, 3, 10 years, I think part of the confusion for people is obviously they see AI as a tool, but they don't fully understand like how the technology works. So they open up ChatGPT, maybe they're even generating all these ideas or writing emails faster. So it feels useful, like even revolutionary in some regards, but like these kind of scenarios of like it would replace them or it would completely change the way that they're working feels out of touch. And so do people underestimate that technology because we're only seeing this like interface and we don't see the infrastructure beneath it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so you're essentially seeing when someone asks AI to do something for them.
Yeah.
And it works okay, but it's not great. And then you're saying, oh, but this is actually maybe going to replace you down the line.
Yeah,
and
so
someone's trying to reconcile that. So there's a few things that are happening. One, yes, it's understanding how these AI systems work. They're not fact-finding machines. They're not even really complex reasoning machines. They can simulate reasoning, but they are prediction engines. So they analyze a bunch of data, mostly language data, but it could be images, and they spot patterns in that data. And then they learn to predict the next word that should come next in that sentence or that sequence, next token prediction. So they are optimizing to be they're optimizing to sound right, not necessarily be right. So understanding that's actually what's happening under the hood. A lot of the times if you're writing an email, that's sufficient. But if you're giving AI a more complex problem and there cannot be room for error, you're not just kind of reasoning about some idea or some kind of brand slogan, it's probably not going to work very well for you if you just ask it a one-off idea. And it also depends on how you're structuring your problem and your question to AI. So if you haven't fully understood how you interact with these systems, how you give it context, how you follow up on its work. It'd be the same as asking an intern to do something and never giving it any background on what you're asking it to do, what you're asking that person to do. They probably wouldn't perform really well off of just the one-off. Yeah. So that is also going to take time. But yeah, these systems aren't, at this point, designed to do things that require a lot of steps and a lot of memory and keeping an idea consistent over a long period of time. They're going to struggle with that. But I would say they are worse. AI systems are worse than some people describe them and a lot better than some people think they are. And so that's kind of the space that we're residing in right now.
Tristan Harris said that the people behind AI don't fully know how AI works. And I wanted to get your take on that, because it is, when you're talking about this being like a predictive text on steroids, like it almost seems like that is the technology, but it almost seems like reductionistic for what it's outputting and how fast it's doing and how complex what it's saying back to you is. Almost like it's reasoning in a human mind. Are there truly aspects of the technology that the people who are making it don't fully understand how it works? Or you feel like they have actually mapped out the entire spectrum?
No, that's true.
It is true.
So it's not that they don't understand at all what is happening, but generative models aren't programmed to generate those outputs directly. So computer scientists and anybody building the models truly don't actually fully know why exactly this works. And that's what also makes them quite unpredictable. So they do know that the more data you give these systems, they tend to be a little bit more accurate and the output gets better. But why? What's really happening under the hood in that black box where you go from here's a bunch of data and then write me an email or an essay and it sounds amazing. The AI is learning those patterns on its own. It's putting different words and letters in its own vectors and finding associations between words. It will translate them into different numbers on its own. No one is telling it to do that. No one is saying that the sky, when someone says the sky is, the answer is usually blue. It's found those patterns on its own. And so that's what people mean when they say that AI programmers and leaders don't actually fully know why this works. They don't, but they do know that you can reliably throw a bunch of data at AI systems, generative systems, and they'll be able to predict the next word better and better the more data you give it up until a point in time.
How would you think about the word intelligence? And so human intelligence versus this thing being intelligent.
Sure, I'd say AI can perform cognitive tasks that humans deem intelligent, but it doesn't necessarily have an understanding. It doesn't have an understanding of the world. It's simulating how we reason. It's simulating our ideas. It's not necessarily thinking at all the way humans do. It just so happens that a lot of how we think can be mimicked by statistical patterns. So maybe that means in some ways we're a lot more predictable, or the language we use to describe our thinking is predictable. But I don't think these systems they don't think the way humans do. The use of intelligence, sure, yeah. There's the camp that says, these systems are really intelligent, or the camp that says this is not actually an intelligent system at all. It's just an amazing pattern matcher. I think both of those are kind of true. But AI isn't doing what people are doing. It's doing something different. I think what is stunning is that language, which is how we describe how we're thinking, is language. So AI is really good at predicting the words we use to describe what we actually mean and what we're actually trying to say. And so that's what's really happening under the hood. It doesn't mean that AI is going to stay in this type of architecture, but that's what's happening for now.
Yeah, because I feel like words hold different meanings and connotations to people. So if you read a headline about AI being more intelligent than humans, or even the word conscious, like that might mean a lot of different things to different people. And so it's when you're trying to understand what people are actually talking about, it could be quite confusing, especially when you talk about consciousness too. Like, is AI conscious? How would you think about that aspect of it?
I don't think the systems we have today are conscious at all, but AI sounds conscious because it was trained on data from conscious people. So if you trained AI on data from dolphins, it would mimic the noises that we hear from dolphins, right? So we are conscious. How we use the words we use to describe our relationships to one another, this is what AI is trained on. So it, of course, sounds like us, conscious people. But under the hood, that's not
It's just like
what's happening.
self-aware almost.
The system?
No, just conscious, and it's not self-aware.
It's not anything. It doesn't have any interest. It's a really impressive mathematical model, because essentially when people say is AI conscious, you're asking, is the data center in Memphis conscious? I would say it's not. Of course, you can go down the philosophical rabbit holes of, well, you can't really prove it is or it isn't because we don't even know what consciousness is. We know what it is. We don't know how to relate it to matter. Therefore, we cannot say a silicone chip is or isn't conscious.
Yeah.
But I think we're safer saying that it's not conscious, because there are actually a lot of consequences of throwing out the idea that AI is conscious. If you have a society that starts to speculate that AI might be more than it is, one, we're going to trust the system way more than we should. If you think it has feelings or sentience, you think it has your best interest when it has no interest.
Mm-hmm.
And two, imagine a world in which people are starting to advocate for AI rights and AI, voting rights in society. All of these things, like you could actually go down that rabbit hole. So a conscious AI system would be a really significant idea. I don't think these systems are conscious, but they sound really good at simulating us, conscious people. And that's what they're designed to do. They're trained on language. But it's so funny. Nobody would say these systems are conscious. No one's going to say DALL-E is conscious. So if we started with image generators or video generators and not language, people most likely would not start to think that these systems are conscious. And it's usually the same amount of compute and the same computational exercise that goes into building these systems. But it's because language is so deeply connected to how we relate to one another. It's how we express most of how we are feeling in a verbal way. And now we're passing that capability to a system that can use that technology in ways that are indistinguishable from us. So of course we might think it's conscious, because we're also biologically wired to associate language with consciousness, right? So we've been trained evolutionary for 200,000 years to get to this point and to use language to communicate what's in my brain to yours. And so, I would be at risk as a species if I mistaken an inanimate object for an animate one. If I thought I thought that rock was actually a wolf, well, I'm toast. So when you chat with an AI system, of course you think that there's a person on the other side of that, because you've been biologically wired to think that.
Yeah, I think some of what you're saying right now is part of and I'm thinking about one friend in particular, for why people say that these sort of doomsday scenarios will almost certainly never happen, because they think about intelligence and consciousness in a way. Their only reference point for that really is like humans. And so, you could think about other mammals, but when you think about something taking over the world or taking over all of these jobs and being able to replace you completely, if AI in its current iteration is what you're saying, and that's how it works, then I think people will have a really hard time with believing any of these scenarios, unless there's some sort of massive leap in intelligence, or the technology just completely changes, a later iteration of the technology, which allows some of the complex reasoning and self-awareness and even more unpredictability in the way that it would behave. So do you think that line of reasoning, that this is overhyped based on that premise, is accurate?
And you see that line of reasoning, that these systems are still they're bounded in how sophisticated they can get, and how much reasoning that they can actually simulate.
Yes.
Therefore, they're not truly a threat in many
threat
regards.
To our existence and threat to our livelihood and our jobs.
And I would say no, not necessarily, because I think you can still use these tools as a threat multiplier. So an actor that wants to commit harm in some way can now springboard using an AI system. So we're going to see this kind of rebalancing of power. So you can still cause harm using current AI systems, which is quite scary.
But it's through human agency that's coming to pass. Because what I'm really addressing is this alternative race doomsday scenario that is like the AI is going to be autonomous on its own and could in some way rival humans in terms of the control of the world, and then of course taking over all of the jobs because they're smarter, they're more capable of doing it, and they could reason at complex levels.
And I think that, those scenarios can happen in different ways. So you could have a AI that continues to advance over time, and it impacts jobs more, but it doesn't necessarily also mean that we're headed towards an existential takeover by the technology.
Yeah.
Or you could also build AI in such a way that it is recursively self-improving, and it still doesn't have inherent desires to do these things, but you've hooked it up to critical infrastructure, and it's either made a mistake or it realizes, I need to shut off this water plant because I need to achieve this goal. And so it's not necessarily after people in the way that sometimes it's framed, but it's almost like a byproduct of what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
So those are possible. But where I stand on the kind of existential challenges of artificial intelligence, I'm really happy that there are scientists, really smart scientists, working on that. And as a futurist and someone that does foresight, you always want to have a plan for the best and worst case scenarios. I don't know if everybody should be, at 6 p.m. going to dinner with their family and solving the existential scenario and mapping that out. I think that there are other things that people can be doing in preparation for this technology. But sure, it's not a zero risk that AI just starts to behave in ways we don't understand. But I don't think it's in the ways that we tend to imagine and we tend to anthropomorphize. But it doesn't mean that the technology in and of itself isn't risky.
So one of the other predictions that you made for 2026 was that LLMs, which is the technology behind these chatbots, may be approaching a plateau in terms of their intelligence gains. So that's highly relevant to sort of what we're talking about. What kind of creates that ceiling in your mind?
Yeah, so this transformer architecture, the architecture that underpins LLM, so they're the next token prediction, essentially. One part of it is we're seeing diminishing returns. So you can throw a lot more data at these AI systems that we had described. They, read a bunch of text and spot patterns in that text, and a lot more computational power at them. But the output is starting to improve only marginally. So it's starting to make less and less sense to continue to crank out these massive models and these massive advancements in next generation of these models because the return is diminishing over time. So that's one aspect of it. And then there's these upper limits of how far can you really take a prediction machine. So if it's still going to have, even if the error is only 5% in most of the work that it does, well, if you're going to give that system 20 tasks, that's, I don't know, what, a 40% now error rate over that horizon, that's not going to be acceptable for a lot of workflows or a lot of industries. So we might hit the limit there as well. And then I would say, by and large, why would the AI journey suddenly stop? Right? So if we've moved from, deep learning, and then we saw the rise of transformer architectures in 2017, why does the journey suddenly end in progress? So I think we will start to see companies, I think that they're actually already working on this. Just last week, Sam Altman stated, we're going to need something past the transformer architecture that will be as radical as the transformers once were. And when I say transformers, I'm referring to the type of architecture underpinning ChatGPT for somebody that doesn't know what I mean there. We've seen Jan LeCun, the former head of AI at Meta, say something very similar. We've seen Demis Hassabis, the head of AI at Google, say something similar, that we're going to need something different to take us over the curve so AI can be more reliable, more predictable. It can solve long horizon tasks and actually do that complex reasoning. An LLM, it doesn't actually understand the world or even simulate it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually know. If you tip your glass, it could say that it's going to fall, but it can't actually simulate that water hits the ground and what all of that means. So if we're going to have systems in the world doing all this stuff, they're going to need to actually be able to simulate the world, and LLMs don't do that.
Yeah, I guess the example that comes up in my mind, and this ties back to what I was saying about Bill Gurley and the fear around AI and these big picture narratives that people keep hearing in the news, is that if I were to say to you, we're going to cure cancer. And so the equivalent here would be like, we're going to create super intelligence that is going to be able to just do everything that humans can. And it's one thing if I have a path to curing cancer and it's something like tangible that I could show you. I'm like, we're going to go from A to B to C to D, and then we're going to cure cancer. And so if people were hyping this LLM technology and they're like, we're going to get to super intelligence from the LLM technology, and what we're saying here is that it might end up plateauing, then the idea of super intelligence coming through LLMs is probably not going to be the technology that gets us there. So then where that becomes relevant is that basically, are we at like ground zero then? So then I'm telling you I'm going to cure cancer, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that, which is basically like anything else, right? So are we going to have to create a brand new technology that we don't even have a foundation for right now? And so that would radically change some of these future scenarios that we're talking about and our ability to even get there.
Yeah, I'd say, so one, the systems we have today, if all progress stopped and no one could do anything else, they are still radically disruptive.
Yes, I agree.
And I think people need to still understand that. Most companies have not even absorbed what a present-day LLM means for the relevance of their business model, if it's going to be relevant at all. So that there still could be a lot of disruption. We haven't absorbed and diffused these AI systems to their potential.
Which is what we were talking about in the beginning. Yeah, the conversation, yeah.
But then if you're going to say, okay, the system is going to be able to do anything that a human can do in one shot. It can, a robot could walk into a room and it could pick up a bunch of things that it hasn't seen before. It could simulate all that stuff. Is this architecture going to take us there? Probably not. But I don't think we start at zero. I think the stack will likely continue to build. So it could be an LLM with, a world model, so more of a world simulator on top of it, or like a large action model on top of it. And then there's also neurosymbolic models. So these are models that you could give them more rules and constraints to follow. They're not just predicting the next word. So companies, academics are working on architectures that can complement large language models. So I don't think we start from zero. And then, of course, you can't ever predict a breakthrough. So I'm sure there's a lab somewhere working on some architecture that may seem irrelevant or unrelated to transformers. So that's probably happening too. But sure, if someone was to say AGI or ASI by 2030, no matter what, you can't make those types of predictions because, yes, we don't necessarily have the path.
And those are the predictions that like people hear in the news over the past year.
Yeah, so I think, those are the predictions. You can't really tie a date to it, and that's why the date keeps changing. But you can say over the longer term, these systems are going to get more impressive and be able to complete more not cognitive tasks.
Now, is the technology behind the robots, and so like I was just in LA, you see the Waymos, the self-driving cars going around, which on its own is just mind-blowing to me that like the amount of things you're thinking about as a human when you're driving a car and the things that you need to be aware of and the 10,000 different scenarios of like, that person's getting close to me right now. I should probably like slow down, and it's happening in like a fraction of a second. So to think about a self-driving car, even in its current iteration, is just wild. And then you think about what Elon is building with the Optimus robots, and then you go into China, and they seem like even more wild what they're doing, picking up things or whatever. That's not LLM technology, is it? Or
it could be a mixture. So there's a lot of different types of AI too, right? There's computer vision. Yeah. There's deep learning and machine learning. So all of these different types of AI systems, depending on what the task is at hand. So for driverless vehicles, no, it's not just going to be a next token prediction. When you interact with your Tesla verbally, it is. But there's all different types of AI. It's actually a very broad field. Most people think of ChatGPT when they think of AI, but there's all different types. And that's also what's happening in science. So there's more narrow AI systems that are being used to specifically work on Alzheimer's or medical problems, and they're much more appropriate to biology than just ChatGPT is. So all of these things are also happening in parallel. They just don't get as much visibility because they're maybe not as interesting to people. What they're working on is interesting, but they don't come with these kind of grand statements and gestures.
So so the big thing that has sort of been hyped is agents. And so if people aren't listening and they're not familiar with that term, I mean, basically like an AI that could do a task autonomously and do it well, and maybe even have the capability of humans. What sort of technology would be required to actually develop those sorts of capabilities.
Yeah, and we're getting closer. So Clawbot, Maltbot, some people may have heard of that. It's almost an AI. It is an AI agent that can do things like send emails and stuff, just not necessarily reliably. But sure, in a world where AI can hold a state consistently over many different tasks, and it can do 25 things. A large action model could be something more applicable for agents, or a neurosymbolic model. So the AI actually has constraints on top of the language. So you'd want the language model so you can interact with it and just give it an instruction in human language. But you're also going to want to be able to hook it up to tools. You're going to want it to be able to predict and simulate what action should come next, not just what word should come next, and be able to do that over 20 different tasks connected to one another. Companies are working on that, and there's elements of agents where you don't necessarily need all of that reliability for it to be useful and productive. But we're not as close to reliable agents as people think, but there's still productive agents that exist right now. And whether you want to call them agents or not, or quasi-agents.
Because in some ways, agents can sound like a nightmare to your average worker working at a Fortune 500 company. But on the flip side, to somebody who's like an entrepreneur, it could feel like a dream of like, rather than hiring 50 different people with money that I don't have, you end up employing these 25 to 30 agents that are doing all these tasks, and you're setting them up in different departments of your company, and they're all operating and carrying out these tasks at a very good to elite level. I mean, that would be like hugely valuable. And those sorts of scenarios I thought were fascinating of like, could there be startups and people in the future who basically are doing the workload of like 300 people, and it's just like 5 of them with like 200 agents.
And that's already happening. So AI first companies where AI is the native software that they're building with from scratch. And so, so these kind of quasi agents where it's an LLM that has access to different tools. So it has access to your email. It has access to a bunch of financial reports or whatever it is that you need as an entrepreneur. You don't have the money to hire a financial analyst or someone to get the latest headlines about something, say, in geopolitics, but that would be a helpful hire for you. You now, maybe for $20 a month, can install an agent to keep tabs on headlines, write the draft of the newspaper or your newsletter, have another agent that files in all of the invoices and just sends them to one person instead of 10 people in payroll to approve. That's a game changer for entrepreneurs and startups. And those all exist. So I think this next chapter, what we'll see in entrepreneurship, is going to be incredible. And think of all the people that have ideas. It's just way too much effort to go and start them, or way too much risk. Now you can start to stream these systems and see, even with the kind of basic coding tools that we have today, you can get not an MVP that's maybe cyber secure yet or reliable, but you can start to see the architecture of an app for $100. These are kind of game-changing new paradigms that we haven't fully seen the outcome and the output of what this will mean at scale, but it's really exciting. It's really cool. Or someone with an idea that just is terrible at writing newsletters and terrible at copy, or would never have hired somebody to do the graphics for their website. But now they have AI to do it, and they just would have never hired anybody.
No,
that's really cool.
Yeah, I guess the gap right now it would be, well, not just capability, but like the actual handing over of trust, especially when it involves interactions with like financial things, large data sets, interacting with other people, obviously on your behalf. And so like mistakes that are being made. But yeah, I think the prospect of that for an entrepreneur is incredible. So
yeah, that part is really exciting. And even, I had a nightmare scenario where somebody created a digital twin of me that you could call it, you could do all this stuff.
Without your permission?
Yeah, I had no idea who this person was. And they had all this stuff about it. You can call it, you can learn, you can ask her questions. She'll tell you about AI and all this stuff. And I can't even remember how I got notified about it. But I didn't really want to hire a lawyer to deal with that and pay all that money. So I just used ChatGPT to draft a cease and desist, and I sent it to the person, and they took it down. And so
Wow.
that's a scenario. As someone who runs their own company, it would be a nightmare for me to bring on engage in a legal dispute over that, and it worked. So those are all, and you can imagine that type of scenario at scale. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I mean, the access to information and things is just mind blowing, and sort of these gate kept type professions and communities and things that you could never access on your own now suddenly become. Of course, it hallucinates sometimes, but it becomes accessible to the average person.
Yep. Yeah, that part is really cool, and we'll see more of that. I mean, there is, of course, a world where we kind of splinter and we live in these kind of AI-generated realities, but there's also a world in which finally most people aren't going to tune in and watch the Fed chair's speech, but what is being said could actually matter for how you're going to do your family planning or if you should take that job or not. Most people just don't have the tools. They haven't studied finance. That speech is irrelevant to them. It doesn't make any sense. But now you have a system that could summarize and customize the content just for you. So we will see this kind of opening of gated intellectual domains for the average person, which is really cool and will lead to all sorts of new unexpected unlocks. The same way the smartphone and decreasing costs of communication and photography led to all sorts of new ideas and companies and ways of working.
So a couple months ago, Jeffrey Hinton, who if people are not aware, it's like called the godfather of AI. And it seems like when you look at his scientific work, it seems like basically all of this technology is being built on some of the things that like he developed back in like 2012. So he said that AI capability is compounding at an extraordinary rate. So in some domains, effectively doubling within months. And so when an expert makes a claim like that, what exactly do you think they're measuring that it's rapidly accelerating?
So we are seeing really intense acceleration and exciting acceleration, for better or for worse, in things like software or maybe areas of mathematics. So not necessarily, and things that AI is being trained and optimized to do. So not necessarily tasks of the average person that are relevant always to the average person, but AI is improving in certain specific domains at rates that past technologies didn't improve at. So in some aspects, some of that is correct. I think people then extrapolate and it's improving everywhere at a 10x rate, and that's not necessarily true. But if you're to zoom down in math, it's been pretty fascinating to watch in software, which isn't surprising. It's made of software. Some pretty exciting gains as well. And then, of course, anything in language. If you were to look at GPT-2, so this was OpenAI's kind of first crack at the can, and I think it came out in 2019. And then GPT-4, just 3 to 4 years later. That's a pretty stunning jump. It was not very coherent, GPT-2. And then GPT-4 in 2022 could write a high school essay better than most people. It's pretty interesting. That's a pretty big leap. Is it a leap? Yeah. Is it a leap that, means that no jobs are going to exist by the end of the 18 months? No. But when you measure it in isolation, it is quite impressive.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about those sorts of scenarios and you think about 10 years ago that would even be possible, I think people would think that was crazy. And so the rate of change feels exponential in some regards. And yeah, if you look at past technologies, like the rate of change just feels like in some regards, like whatever 1 year was before, it feels like 10 years of change or a technological advancement is happening so quickly.
These numbers of improvement and these metrics are really impressive. And it is interesting how easily AI has just filtered into people's workflows, and they just don't think of it. Just ask ChatGPT. The amount of people that turn to that system over the course of 2 years for most people.
Yeah,
that is quite stunning. If you think about how long it took people to get on email, and then to build a website and have a presence on the internet, to how long it took AI to become in people's day-to-day workflows and work lives, that's pretty striking.
So we addressed like the claims, some of the scenarios, the technology. I mean, if you were to address people's cultural mood right now and then getting into the practicals of like the skills that they might need. So, there's a noticeable undercurrent of powerlessness that people feel as a result of these headlines. And so people feel like this is happening to them, but it's not happening with them. And so let me just ask you this directly. Do you feel like this trajectory that we're on is like inevitable?
Nothing about the future is inevitable. AI is a general purpose technology, so it's going to, not the technology literally itself behave like electricity, but it will become much more foundational like electricity has or like the internet has. So that much, I mean, it already is moving in that direction. So AI becoming a part of our lives, it already is. So is that inevitable? Is it not? It's already here in that way. But the outcomes, where we go from here, none of that is inevitable, right? The future is the combination of the decisions that we make right now. Decisions are still being made today, and they're going to be made tomorrow. And all of those decisions will steer us in different directions. So I understand the feeling of powerlessness, and there's areas that I feel it too. And the power asymmetry is real. But those are also design spaces, and decisions can be made that move us in a different direction. And that's not inevitable. That's still up for grabs. So I do empathize with feeling powerless. And I think it is important that we pay attention to these power dynamics. They're extraordinary. And we haven't seen power asymmetry like this, private sector over public sector, since the 1700s. So this is really significant. But we aren't doomed. And where all of this nets out, that is still an open design question. It's not done. It's not solved, even though it's going to be pitched as sold, especially if you have to raise a bunch of funds for it to turn out that way. But it's absolutely not inevitable.
Yeah, so I think it becomes a matter of where can people most find their agency in this conversation? Because some of the powerlessness feels like, okay, well, people didn't explicitly ask for AI like 10 years ago. It wasn't like we did a mass survey and everybody's like, yes, let's create artificial intelligence. And so, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, there's about 7 companies that are really like shaping this technology. And then you look at the valuations of those companies. Now you have, I don't know, there's like, there's like 5 or 6 now that are worth over $1 trillion, which, if you were to think back in 2011, even, that's like just unfathomable that they would have these valuations. So people feel like people are deciding their life for them in some sense. What are the things that you feel like people could be confident that they have like agency over and power? What would you direct them to?
I mean, how you spend your time is a big act of agency. So from how we spend our, even, social media as one massive platform with artificial intelligence powering a company that's trying to drive the future. You can direct your time in different ways. Even the different AI systems that you choose to use, if you feel like a company aligns with a future that's more in line with what you think is a better outcome for the rest of humanity, then that's agency you can use, and just in the various tools. I think AI needs to be much more of a voting issue than it is. And so there are things that you can demand from elected officials. There are things that you can ask of elected officials in this moment. How are you using AI even in your job? I mean, how is your company deploying these systems? Can you get into those meetings? Are there surveillance policies that your work is going to use or not use? These are all things that we can ask and we can engage in. And I also think the more, and this is counterintuitive because I get that there is also a resistance to using these technologies. The last thing you want to do if you think somebody is getting more powerful is give them more power. But the more you do engage with AI, the better feedback you have about it, about who it works for and who it doesn't work for. So that can make some of your feedback just a bit more informed and a bit more targeted. So I think we aren't entirely helpless, and collectively too, there are a lot of people that feel the same way. So the collective outcome of that is kind of steering us in different directions. I mean, the different elected officials over the next couple of years are going to be really significant in how this technology gets built. I think it was Singapore. Just this week, there was an announcement of helping people become fully AI literate. So there'll be 100,000 people that get this training because you are a specialist. And this is another thing too, you are a specialist in your domain. So understanding how AI does and doesn't relate to the work that you do or the field that you're in. And so Singapore is going to sponsor 100,000 people to get the expertise that they need in this world. Their whole policy and campaign around AI is this isn't happening without people. We need to bring everybody along in this ride. That's an entirely different paradigm for AI. So we aren't stuck in a world where we feel like leaders are just going to drive it in a certain way, and we have political leaders that aren't necessarily going to have our backs. There are things we can buy and not buy, and there are people we can vote for or not vote for that lead to different outcomes, and we're seeing different outcomes around the world.
Yeah, because it seems like there are a few camps of responses, and so the Tristan Harris response is, we need to halt basically in some ways the just progress of this, and just like on the reckless development of this without even like thinking through. And so the energy of a social movement to the point of maybe protests or whatever, people being like, hey, this is going too fast, and like we need to like slow down and seriously like take a look at what we're building rather than just like gung-ho, let's just continue. I mean, that's one route. And then you have people in the government, obviously, that may or may not be on board with regulating it. And so that's like a whole entire conversation of maybe don't regulate it. Like we just need to keep pushing. And so people hear all these things. And so it's like devote your attention to that sort of thing. Or the very like day-to-day practical thing is like, just figure out how to use it in your own life and accept that like this is happening. How would you think about those different scenarios?
I mean, I don't know if those are all the binaries that we have to exist. I mean, I think you can engage with AI, understand what it means for your job in the shorter term, how well these systems do or don't work for you or your community, while also thinking, okay, you know what, I actually don't like the speed that these systems are moving at. I think I do want to raise that to elected officials. Like those things aren't mutually exclusive. I think you can exist in both of those domains. The idea that you might be in a country where a government feels like they just don't want to regulate this technology, that is tricky and that is real. But for most of those scenarios, the government or the person in power isn't there in perpetuity. And there have been scenarios where people have been quite vocal and policy has gone in different ways as a result. I mean, I think there are little acts of agency. I mean, and especially in America, money talks. So if we can direct our dollars in a different way, and I mean, I'm Canadian, but I do live here now. But if people in a country feel like they want things to go in a different way, I mean, the markets seem to speak really loud here. So those are other acts that people can do. But I would say the biggest fear for me, it actually isn't the existential scenarios that some people paint about the future. It isn't this AI race winning, losing. It's that we actually feel hopeless, because a hopeless society is a disempowered society. And a disempowered society doesn't do anything. We feel like it's over. We unsubscribe from the moment and we let other people do it and other people build it. And I think that's the only way to guarantee an outcome that doesn't work for most people. So it's not that no dreams are going to be built. They just wouldn't be ours. So I think we still have to, the small ways we can exert agency still matter in summation. I would be much more concerned if everyone said it's over. Someone else build it. Forget about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people might. So some of these scenarios might feel unfamiliar, or calls to action. Even approaching a local official or talking about these things, I don't know what percentage of people have actually done that before versus are or even unsure of even how to do that. And so those little moments of agency, like people might listen to something and be like, okay, well, what do I do? Yeah. What do I do now?
I mean, and the irony is, sure, use ChatGPT to write a really compelling email to your local elected official that this is something that matters to me and my community. And I have started to see, as much as we can trust anything on X, but I have started to see different, I will say, people aspiring to step into politics or that are running, where AI is starting to be a bit more part of their campaign.
Yeah.
So I think that there's that. There's other countries that are building it differently that show that it actually is possible to have outcomes that aren't zero-sum for the people and for the private sector. So this isn't kind of the only game in town that's happening. There are countries that are also coming together to build competitors to the reality that we're in. So there are all of these different outcomes and kind of signals in the data that show that this zero-sum future isn't the one that we have to all be headed for. But I think the worst thing we can do is fully subscribe from the moment. And that doesn't mean everybody has to be a part of every debate everywhere. I'm at the Existential Campaign. I'm at the Workers' Rights Act. You don't have to be a part of everything. But just the small ways you can exercise agency if you feel like you have it, I think are really important.
What I love about your work is I feel like you help instill hope in people in very practical ways. And so whether your podcast and Substack, a lot of the things that you've been writing and talking about, I think it really helps people like prepare for that transition. So like of what the next 10 years are going to look like. And so if you were to focus, you called this the dawn of the independent era. And so can you explain a little bit about that and what you feel like is coming?
Yeah. And of course, nobody can make predictions about the future, especially not a futurist. But what we can start to see in the data is the rise of more contract or independent-based work as the dominant form of work in the market. So if you think about this from the perspective of a company, and we've even talked about it today, a financial analyst job today may look very different in 18 months. You still might need somebody to do different things, maybe direct a bunch of AI agents, but the skills are going to change. And maybe that workflow is entirely different again in 48 months. So I'm less likely, if I'm the CEO of a big company, to hire for that role as full-time. I'm going to opt much for a shorter-term contract, a year, 18 months. So when you think about that, times a lot of the jobs and we can focus in on the knowledge economy for now, we'll start to see the rise of much more independent-based work in the workforce. And that's kind of new for a lot of people. We do see the rise of much more, you and I are both technically independent workers as it is. We do our own thing. But the dominant form of labor may start to look more like that, where instead of working for one company, doing one thing, you work for a few companies, doing the skills that you are endowed with, or the skills that you have in the field that you work in. And that's a very different type of workforce because it means you become your own CEO, right? You are an organization of one, and you apply your skills to a variety of different companies or projects. And so that's, I'd say, the rise of the independent era. And it's a very different future. It has many implications for things like health insurance and Social Security. Not everybody wants to be an independent worker. There is a lot of comfort for some people. For some people, it's their nightmare, but for others, being able to have consistency 9 to 5. But we should start to see the idea of a 9 to 5 job for one company will be a chapter in human history. And that chapter is closing, for sure.
That could bring a lot of anxiety for people of like, I know what it's like to like run a company and be an entrepreneur. We've been doing this for like 8 years, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And so I wouldn't say it does sort of require a particular type of person, or at least a particular type of mindset to be able to endure, because there's so much uncertainty. There's so much like if you're working for 5 different companies and you're a freelancer and one of those things drops, then 20% of your income goes out the window versus they might be bored at work, but the safety net of I have like $80,000 a year coming in. You
can plan.
Yeah.
Right? It becomes impossible to not know what is my income next year or the year after. But remember, variables don't change in isolation. So when the fabric of the workforce starts to shift, new business models, new types of platforms and infrastructure start to come into play that allow that to make more sense. So right now, what we're probably doing is extrapolating, okay, everything stays the same. The only thing that changes about the world around me is that I now hold 3 different jobs for 3 different companies. And there are these massive gaps between new projects that we're going to work on and existing ones fading away. Other variables will start to change. But yeah, it is a very unsettling future for many that enjoy the security of a stable job. And it is something that I do try to call attention to on my platforms. If we can see this transition happening, something like Social Security and something like healthcare is going to become really important for people. And even just having the ability to reach up and grab new skills or to be able to continuously pivot, that's an entirely different market, but it's one that we're starting to move towards. So my advice for people in this moment is don't think of your job in terms of the title that you hold. Think of the skills that you have under it. So be industry agnostic, be job title agnostic. What are the types of skills that you're performing, right? Okay, so I exercise judgment when I do this. I use creative intelligence because I'm the person that always comes up with the ideas. Whatever it is that are the kind of skills that you occupy, that you use every single day, those are what you'll continue to apply, just in different ways. And so maybe you'll be directing AI systems to do those tasks, but applying the expertise that you have and the role that you've been maybe holding for the last 5 years. And that's how you start to look at it. So it's going to change, of course. I mean, and work has always changed, even the idea that a lot of people work from home, like that was so radical even a decade ago, that a significant portion of people would opt for virtual work, or at least partial virtual work. So I think we can adjust to it. But do we have the infrastructure in play, the policy support, the entirely different, again, I've mentioned Social Security because I think it's really important and we don't have those safety nets. But yeah, thinking of yourself as an organization that offers a bundle of skills to a variety of different projects, that's one way to think about the future, and to think about skills over thinking about job titles. Much more important.
Now, I don't know if in terms of thinking about skills invalidates this entire question, but the idea of being a synthesizer versus and like a generalist versus like a specialist in one sort of area, how would you think about that? Because like, for example, if you have been working for the past 10 or 15 years and you've been doing this one sort of thing, right? Let's just say marketing, you're doing email marketing. And there's someone who might be a generalist. They might not be an expert in like email marketing, but they might be doing 7 different things across domains and marketing. So they have like a way wider expertise, and also in some ways I would probably say their risk is lower because they can pipe in and out of different things because they are like general and synthesizer, versus everything isn't relying on them being in email marketing and them going, oh, like I don't know how to do anything else. Do you feel like that aspect of the conversation is going to be relevant with AI?
Like who's better positioned, the experts and the people with domain expertise, or the generalists?
Exactly.
I don't think that we've netted out on if who wins what where, because so let's take that example. You're working in email marketing, and I think we could probably safely say that is something that AI is already doing. So going forward, that's, if it hasn't already impacted your work, it's probably going to. Okay, so does that mean that the generalist comes in and scoops up all of those email marketing jobs? If you look at the skills under email marketing, why is it that somebody clicked your emails over the other companies? And how did you think about adjusting those campaigns when it wasn't working, right? What was the psychology that went into how you structured those titles and where you placed images that allowed somebody to respond differently? How does that type of thinking happen in a world where AI is marketing the product and you're giving AI the framing of your brand, the culture of the company, whatever it is that you're selling? So what were the underlying skills that went into you structuring that? And that's why it's so foreign for us to think about how we were thinking or how we are thinking. We just don't think about it that way. We just do the task. But what was the thinking that happened before that task and how you evaluated whether that was successful? That is what you're taking with you to the next thing.
And that you're saying that's what's going to be valuable to a company, potentially.
It's the thinking under it. Yeah. So maybe you're not writing emails anymore because AI writes it better, but you are bringing the skill set in that people don't like to hear the number first. When you start with the price, even though it's an amazing sale, they don't want to hear it. Like, you're still bringing in those types of things. And this is why, or if we can, you'll have better ideas, perhaps, if you're thinking about it that way, than somebody that's just never in their life dealt with marketing. They can do some stuff, but you could outcompete them in certain areas if you're thinking about how you're thinking. And that's, of course, not just a universal thing that's going to apply across the board, but it can apply in many cases.
So does that mean that someone wouldn't have to know email marketing at all, and that, like, because of AI and that it's helping with that, someone would be able to pipe into temporarily doing email marketing because they carry a set of skills?
Wait, so I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
So if someone's carrying this set of skills across like domains and across tasks, and they're working with AI to accomplish those things, does that mean that their ability to know the ins and outs of email marketing is less relevant?
Okay, so I love that you asked that, because what you were essentially saying is you could have skills in one area and they actually become more applicable in another area. So the person that had amazing judgment skills, let's say in finance or human resources, may actually be the best person to run marketing in the AI first world, because the types of skills that they were executing may actually work well in the types of decisions that they're making where AI is the dominant platform. So yes, it is possible that that the skills, and this is to quote one of my previous professors, the skills that made you dominant before AI may not be the same skills after AI, right? So the email marketing person, based on the types of decisions that they were making, if they can think about how they were thinking, they may be the best person to make judgment calls on hiring. Right? So we're going to start to do different things. So that's why it's so much more important to think about the underlying skills of how you made decisions for not just the simple task that you did, but how did you make the decision before that task? And we're not taught to think about our thinking on that meta level, but it's really important. And that also expands the type of work you think you're capable of, because you might be limiting yourself to email marketing, but you could actually be the best person to make judgment calls on finance decisions because the AI is crunching all the numbers. You're making the judgment call. Do we go with market X or market Y? And market X is these types of people, and this type of group is very sensitive to price every time we engage with them on email. But this type of group never cared about the emails about price, and we're trying to target luxury. Let's go after them, and that could be the email marketer.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it in terms of further, because we said in the beginning of the conversation, the idea of envisioning a future world that doesn't exist, it almost feels like Chinese to a lot of people. So if we were to further paint that world, you've talked about like career ladders shrinking, and that the shelf life of skills will shorten. So the very idea of like a career might evolve. And so like, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so I think we have spent the last few decades building up the idea of work where you learn, you work, and then you retire. And that worked for a certain type of economy where skills and tasks were cumulative and pretty predictable. But in an era where AI and different technologies will continue to change the types of skills that we're going to need to bring to the table and how different types of work gets done and which types of products are interesting and our buying behavior, that consistency of working vertically up a ladder starts to make less sense. Because in an era of skills over, say, job titles and sometimes even over experience, it doesn't necessarily matter if someone has worked 5 years or 15, if the person who's worked 5 years is continuing, they can learn different skills or how they apply their skills is more advantageous. So that career ladder starts to make less sense, and we're already starting to see some of it not entirely get pulled out, but junior hires not necessarily making as we're seeing lower numbers of junior hires. And that I think is actually going to be temporary. I think we're going to start to see them funnel into different types of roles, like directing AI systems and AI agents. And then that's actually quite interesting, right? If you take a legal firm, a partner is probably best to make the final judgment calls. Like, okay, we've been in this type of court scenario before. This is how this judge behaves. But the junior or the younger person that now is no longer on that paralegal ladder or whatever came first, but they're on the AI agent director ladder, they're pretty equally important in that firm, because that legal company can no longer keep up if they aren't diffusing agents the way their competitors are. So that idea of the autonomy ladder and all of that starts to make less and less sense in a skills over job title era.
What is like a resume? Like if you apply for a position, what does a resume even
Oh my goodness.
look like?
What is resumes for who? Written by AI for AI. Resumes, we're going to have to figure out different ways for how we signal our skills, because now it's complete deception. Nobody's real reading it and writing it. Most of these resumes are optimized by AI, so we're going to have to show different ways, a lot more real-time tests of getting work done. But resumes also, they are a reflection of usually a hierarchy of experience. And so in an era of skills, it's a little bit different, right? I just need this outcome done. And do you have the skills to do it? And it's probably shorter term. So the investment is a little bit different versus if you're hiring someone and you're like, I'm hoping to bring you up the career ladder. We're making an investment in you versus you come with your bundle of skills. That's probably also going to change hiring dynamics. But we're, again, in the strange in between times. We're hiring. I don't know how people are making decisions right now. Who wrote that? What wrote that? Which model? And who's reading that? What's reading that? Hiring is kind of a little bit of a nightmare right now.
Yeah, I mean, even if you get a letter from someone like that wants to work at your company or something, I mean, it's impossible to know. Like, does that actually? Which I think you've talked about. One of the skills which I want to get into is like, if you're using AI, then you have to be able to explain and articulate yourself based on whatever it put out there. So it's like an extension of you in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take me into that?
Yeah, I mean, being able to explain the reasoning behind why you made decisions and what those judgment calls led to, that's a skill that's interesting to me. So if somebody did send me a resume and I'm reading their resume and I'm reading their cover letter and then they'll say, yeah, I'm very, AI savvy. I've built a bunch of agents. That's also interesting too. I think people that can build different agent workflows or optimize AI in certain ways that are helpful to complete tasks more quickly. That's a new area I'd pay attention to, especially if I'm younger out of college. But if someone was to say, I use AI in X, Y, and Z ways, and when it performs this task and gives me this output, here is the trade-off tree that I use to make decisions for my company about whether this is acceptable or whether it's not. And when I built this led to this type of performance as a result, or we increased gains by X or by Y, and always use measurable numbers on your resume. Then that's something that's interesting to me. So people who can explain and show that they have judgment skills and they have deep problem-solving skills. And that's also another thing. If you were applying for a job and you are applying for a job in something that seems unrelated, but I could see that you could solve problems, you're explaining the problems that you solved on your company and at your company and how you did it. That's a really important skill. It doesn't actually matter that there are logistical problems and you're trying to now move into marketing or something else. These are the types of skills that are very transferable. And again, it means taking a step back and thinking, how do I solve problems? What skills am I even using every day?
Yeah, because I think at some level, I'd imagine some people have shame or they don't want to reveal in some way that they are using AI to do certain things because they don't want to seem inauthentic. Do you imagine a world where like everybody's assuming that everybody's using AI and it's out in the open, and so that sort of shame mentality starts to go away?
Eventually. It's also really funny because being in these in-between times, we hope that employees and people are building up AI skills. But then for some employers, and there was a scenario this week, if you were to tell them, oh, I used AI for this, they would still maybe be upset. Like, oh, use it for everything else, but except for the work you do with me. But I think eventually we will, by eventually probably in the next year, I mean, I also know employers on the other side where they already expect you to come to the table with AI skills. It's just, please let that be the default. You should be using it in everything you do. But eventually it will just be like the computer. I don't know the last time somebody was in a job interview and it was like, can you operate this? Or somebody was, I proficient in PowerPoint. I mean, we're just not doing those things anymore. And AI will be the same. It's not going to be a tool that people grab. It's going to be just the thing that we're on.
Yeah, I think it's the language thing that you said earlier. You were talking about how much language is associated with consciousness and then like human intelligence. And so I think the difference of using a computer is like if you're using AI to communicate with this person over there, they might feel like they're talking to a robot and not actually talking to you. And I guess that's where like the ownership of the insights of whatever you're putting in front of them becomes an authentic extension of you versus it's just something that like ChatGPT spit out and then I gave it to you.
Yeah. If you're using AI in very generic ways, and then that's where the story ends, and then that's the text, that's the love note, that's the I don't think it's going to work out well. Maybe right now you have some arbitrage opportunity and it sounds amazing that somebody's now magically a poet. But in time, we're going to start to expect that AI is the default interface and it played a role in drafting. And so where you is uniquely you in that, I think will be important. But yes, eventually. And that is also a concern, right, on the flip side. What does it mean when AI is always between you and I? Always. Right? The way your iPad's here right now. What does it mean for that iPad to be talking back?
Yeah.
In this moment, listening, observing, interpreting, studying us, extracting data from us. That's what's also coming. And that's really interesting. There's really scary parts of that and interesting parts of that. But yeah, it will change how humans relate to each other. We want to be steering that in a way that we don't continue to end up in an environment where it's more and more challenging for us to relate to each other. But yeah, what does it mean for AI to be between most people?
Yeah, because there's a processing of information that happens very quickly, and you could relate to this even to romantic relationships as well. So let's just say you're in a fight with your partner, and then rather than saying something that's extremely emotionally unhealthy, you utilize AI to come up with a response. But at some level, that's probably better than the explosion and saying something that's very unhealthy. But unless you've internalized the ideas that AI came up with in your relationship of why that is a better response, and then trying to embody that in some way, then it's just like a piece of paper that you're sending. It's not really you, in I guess a sense.
Yeah, and that's some of the studies that have alluded to cognitive atrophy or this cognitive offloading. Some of the experiments that they've done to reach those conclusions show that when students use an essay or use AI to write an essay, 5 days later, they didn't even know what was in the essay. They didn't feel like they could take ownership for those words. The idea was mine, but I don't know what actually happened between the first and second paragraph. Imagine that, right, in relationships. Well, this is what you told me, and this is why you said we would never experience this again. Did I? Oh, what? I didn't know that was exactly in those words.
It's just like a conduit of information that went from AI through you to someone else instead of something that you sat with.
And that's and there's many different ways to look at this. On the one hand, we could put some of the responsibility onto AI companies, designing systems that don't ever push back on us, that don't ever ask clarifying questions to make sure that that thing resonates with us. Or if we're in a very heightened emotional state, you know what, I'm an AI, don't forget that. I think you should go seek a friend or somebody that's actually living with a heartbeat. Those are design decisions. And then there's also the AI literacy component of that. And having agency, how much are you offloading everything? And would you feel good taking everything to Reddit and getting feedback on it? Maybe in some scenarios, but maybe it's not always appropriate. And then, of course, there will be this change where a new technology is changing. If we were to actually map out how text messages have impacted the relationships people have, that text has gotten shorter, brief, but continuous. That's probably had a profound impact on relationships, and we just haven't really thought about it or haven't really measured it.
That's true.
And some people seem okay. I don't know how everyone's doing, but some of us have made it on the other side of text. So then there's also the scenarios where we can actually see, and maybe it does strengthen. For some people, long distance relationships have become better because of FaceTime, and you're not actually fully separated all the time. Maybe there is a world, and there actually is a world where AI could strengthen our relationships. But again, it depends on how it's designed, how we use it. And all of that is still design space.
So, that's the ability to understand and explain the ideas that are coming from AI in terms of a non-negotiable becoming AI literate to begin with. Does that really start with knowing how to prompt? How would you coach people through becoming AI literate in this kind of new world?
Yeah. I would say it starts with probably knowing what AI is and what AI isn't. So AI isn't your friend. It's not a system that has your best interest. It's a system that makes really strong predictions with words. And that is exceptionally helpful in many scenarios. But that's what AI is. It isn't some oracle. It doesn't have all of the answers. It doesn't have it shouldn't have this aura of authority. And then knowing that AI is only going to be as helpful as the thinking you've done and the questions that you're asking it. So what you bring AI, it's going to meet you at that bar, and the output is going to meet you. It's not going to magically raise the bar on what you suddenly bring to the table. So the thinking you do before AI still really matters. And then, yes, you can start to think about the idea of prompting. So am I giving AI a role? If you're asking it to help you write a stronger essay or newsletter or op-ed, giving it, you are an editor at, publication that you're aspiring to write for, and giving it some boundary, giving it some identity that it can inhabit as it's trying to help you with the problem that you're solving. So there are some nuances to prompting. Prompting is going to be this evolving conveyor belt, though. As AI becomes more integrated into our world, we're not going to necessarily need to give it all this context ahead of time. And then it's just going to be a bit more continuous. So the prompting itself will change. But yes, the thinking that goes into using AI really matters. It is absolutely not magic. It has nobody's best interest. It has no interest at all. And to still know that your time is valuable. So spending just unlimited time engaging with an AI system has an opportunity cost. You're spending that time not doing something else. So to also remember that, right? This is a technology. People building it have certain incentives. So to still have ownership over your time.
What are the cognitive things that you feel like people should not be giving up to AI? And then how do you retain those things and then bring that to the table when you're using AI?
The cognitive things people shouldn't offload to AI. I think your judgment. So AI shouldn't be making final judgment calls. If the question is help me with this email, okay, fine, offload that if it's not really an important email. But if the person on the other side of that email is a partner and you're at the edge of a relationship, don't offload the drafting of that email to AI. Maybe make sure, do I come off narcissistic? Do I come off? Sure, you can, but don't offload that judgment call to AI in an AI system. If you are making a big life decision about something, retain your judgment, retain your discernment of making that problem on your own. I think we shouldn't offload any of that. I think problem solving, you still need to know how to solve problems. And that is a really employable skill in the future. And if you offload that, that's going to have economic impacts, and then also behavioral and your ability to navigate relational impacts. Your communication skills, I think we shouldn't offload. And that one seems paradoxical, right? Because if you're going to use AI, you're not inherently communicating, but how you communicate to the AI also actually matters. The more you can articulate your problem or the thing that you want it to do, the better it's going to work for you. And the more you're going to need to learn how to work with people. So if we're in this system, in this world where AIs are everywhere and we're streaming them, the people we choose to build our teams with, I'm going to choose the person that is enjoyable to work with and can share their ideas with me, because now we have all of these kind of R2D2s around us. So those personal, emotional intelligence skills also still matter. Yeah, I think that if those are some of the cognitive skills: your judgment, your discernment, your problem solving, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, communication. And yeah, I mean, you can think of AI in some ways maybe as a bit of an extension of us, the same way if your plane took off and you left your smartphone in the lounge, it would be panic at the disco. It will probably eventually be like that with AI. But yeah, this isn't a system that's alive. It's a system to support.
So do you consider those to be the skills that then would transcend fields, essentially judgment, communication, or are there other ones that you would, an understanding of an ability to articulate ideas, like are those the ones that are going to transcend, or is there additional ones that you would place on top of that as you kind of?
So those ones would be foundationally really important for the future. If you cannot make any judgment calls, and I mean, if we're going to be moving towards a world where we'll start to direct AI systems, we do that with judgment. What do you ask it? And was the answer that it gave you good and sufficient? Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important. Contextual awareness is important. Having some understanding of the data, how AI is largely a reflection of the data that it's trained on. So if it wasn't trained on data that's going to encompass anything that you're going to need, it's probably not going to work well for you. So I think that that's probably a skill that matters, some aspects of data literacy. And then domain-specific skills still matter. So sometimes you hear people say it's totally irrelevant. Not entirely true, right? Somebody with domain expertise in biology is going to do much better at applying AI in the synthetic biology company of the future than someone that's maybe waltzing in with expertise in geography. And somebody that's applying AI to geospatial intelligence and they've worked in space or those domain expertise, I think, are still very relevant.
So school is still relevant then, in a sense.
School, so just, yeah.
Education, school, and the ability to even build up a domain of knowledge of these specific domains and fields.
Yeah, if you're working in a field where domain expertise are important, then yeah, I think school, that's still really relevant. I mean, if you're going to work in robotics or you have aspirations to work in gene editing, and going to school and building those domain expertise, I think is still very valuable. Education, when we zoom out though, what skills is it giving people right now? I think we do need probably a mass updating of that, and to be optimizing for skills over memorization and word recall and that sort of thing. But theoretically, if we can do that, then I think education, I mean, and school isn't just for those types of skills, right? You need to learn how to interact with people in the world. You need to learn how to work with groups, how to meet people that are different from you. Mm-hmm. School is also important for those reasons as well. But we do need some updating to curriculums.
I remember like 10 years ago, I was working at, I was teaching a class at this boot camp called General Assembly in New York here. And at that point, I mean, it was for marketing. And so we actually had people that were like in their 50s coming into the course, and they were off the heels of like print marketing and like magazines and stuff like that. So the age of social media was like this huge adjustment. Mm-hmm. And it felt like in some ways they felt like they were like behind the curve of like they settled into like this is the way the marketing world works. And now I have to have this huge adjustment. And that was over like a many-year period that they found themselves in that position. But it feels like with the coming age of AI, people are going to find themselves in that position in like 1-2 years of constantly having to learn new things, which could feel overwhelming for people in some ways, but it seems like it's going to be like the baseline of like of constantly learning.
Yeah. And those would be other skills that we could add: adaptability, learning how to learn. Most of us don't know how do we learn, the same way most of us don't step back and think, what were the skills I just applied to make that decision? So learning how to learn and being able to adapt to new situations, new contexts is really important. But then you also have to remember, once those become the foundational skills that we have and that we've built, it becomes easier to engage in those pivots and to be in a workforce or a world where we do have to continue to learn new things over time. So starting from where we are right now, it's really overwhelming. But eventually, the same way most people are quite fluid with using a computer, and now we do all of these different things on the computer than we did in 2001. Eventually, when you're more adept at adaptability and you're more resilient to it, it stops feeling like such a big radical change.
So if you fast forward 5 years and someone embraced these principles of like the independent era and what's coming, how do you think that they'll not only survive but maybe thrive through like the volatility of what's coming?
Yeah, I mean, if you have adaptability skills, that's pretty key, right? So how well are you adapting to this moment right now? And if you can work on that, that's going to give you an element of resilience and allow you to spot new opportunities. If you've built skills like judgment and you've built skills like continuous learning, there are a lot of opportunities that are up for grabs right now. I mean, most companies are trying to figure out, how do I do a lot of this with AI agents? And if you have the domain expertise of marketing or of finance or of HR, and you're able to help structure those workflows, that's very, very valuable. Being able to have some flexibility with your time. I mean, if we can get this right, a world where we have a little bit more flexibility and freedom could work out well. Again, that's a big if, and that's not just going to be an inevitability. And I think, the second part of your question, how does this end up for them in 5 years?
Yeah. How do you think that person will navigate the coming age versus someone who was resistant or didn't put these things into practice?
I think one person will be building the skills to participate in the job openings and not even just the job openings of the future, right? There's a lot of ways that these tools can help you in your own life. These technologies can help you in what you're doing in your day, on your weekends, and optimize the things that you're doing, give you time back. And you might be missing that if you're just saying, I'm not doing any of this. And I mean, just because a few people say that they're building one version of the future, it doesn't mean that that's going to happen. And so the person who is engaging with this technology, who's spotting the gaps, I mean, and one thing we didn't talk about, a lot of the companies that we see today are also not guarantees in the future.
Yeah.
Most of the companies we think about in our day-to-day lives were born of the internet era. We are in the next chapter. Who's building what's coming? Those are all up for grabs too. So this is a really interesting moment. And if we can have different voices close some of those gaps and reach for some of those opportunities, that's going to be really, really interesting.
That's an important point. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these companies, Apple, Meta, I mean, they're even having to adapt to this coming age. I mean, the thinking about the smartphone being a predominant fixture of society in the past 17, 18 years, and possibilities being floated in the future of like, is the smartphone going to be the predominant thing that we're carrying around?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, so those are conversations that are happening, and like Apple has been the dominant, and Samsung and some of these other players have been the dominant people. So I think that's interesting.
I know. If you want to talk about inevitability, no company that exists today is inevitably going to be a part of the future when it's AI first. Not one of them. And most companies know that. And that's why we're seeing a lot of panic buttons and a lot of different code reds and all of these things. Everybody's adapting to this moment. Of course, there's different resources, different power, different capital. But by and large, no future is guaranteed for any of these companies either. So I think those are pretty interesting opportunities and design spaces and different business models waiting to either be disrupted or to be seized. And that's really cool. And I think, I mean, yeah, there is a world, and it's not a far away world, where we get this right, where people are protected, where we can control AI in ways that we want it to be in control of it. And this can go well. There's, of course, ways where it doesn't go well. But neither of those scenarios are inevitable. And the decisions, I mean, the future hasn't happened yet. We're making the decisions about it today.
And my last question is, you know, if you were to go back to the beginning of the conversation and the subject, Sarah, that we talked about, you know, the one who started to believe that AI is overhyped or confused about this moment, what do you feel like someone like her most needs to understand about the moment that we're living in?
Sarah, what does she need to understand about the moment that we're living in? That we are in an industrial revolution moment. And Sarah can reflect on how much things did change. Timelines are always a bit wonky. What comes out on the other side of that is always a bit gray. You can see some of it, you can't see all of it. But how we live will change over time, and that is also not new. I mean, a lot of the jobs that we hear about and the companies didn't even exist 25 years ago. So expect life to be quite different in some ways, better in some, just strange in others. And I think the more you can lean into the future and the more you can start to try to take part in your own life, I mean, you're the expert of your own life and the domain that you work in, the more in control you're going to be of this moment. And you can probably pay less attention to the headlines and more attention to this technology's impact on your own day-to-day life and your own day-to-day workflow.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.